Episode 48 is with Adam Hugill. Adam rode his bike 20,000 kilometres all up through Asia from south to north. I tried to film this whilst in a barrel of cold water, which was going okay until my wife looked out the back door of the house and saw me, and I suddenly became acutely aware of how unusual my behaviour was, and so I didn't manage to complete it. Anyway, Adam Hugill spent 8 years in the army. He then cycled his bike around the world, or near enough, doing 20,000 kilometres by himself. In this episode we talk about how cold water has led to significant benefits for Adam. He goes cold water dipping pretty much every day in the sea with a group of people. We also talk about moving to a new location, starting a new job, redefining what your purpose is after a significant trip travelling the world, and also the key lessons that he learnt during that bike trip, the 5 key lessons that he learnt during that bike trip, which he now looks to apply to the rest of his life. So some really interesting points from Adam and lessons. I'm Mark Thompson, this is the Watchword podcast, and the watchword this week is cold water and community. I confess, I was supposed to meet Adam today and his sea dipping crew at 8 o'clock in the morning. However, I have 10-month-old twins. Last night was a rough night, and so I've missed the sea dipping crew. So therefore, Magnus and I are going to do some sea dipping of our own 15 minutes after the main dip has taken place, and then our respective dipping groups will reconvene and do what we're here to do. But it's a great day for it. I think we might do the podcast outside. OMG. Ready? What a day. The dog usually freaks out when I do this. He usually stays on the beach and barks a lot, but today he's all over it. Cruising. What's up, partner? Are you a good boy? So I think Adam does this, he dips as they call it, something like every other day. He set himself a target. Doesn't have to do it every day because then puts pressure on yourself, but I think he does it every other day or something like that. There's a community of people that he does it with, and they all meet down by Boscombe Pier, but I decided to do it solo this morning because I missed the sea dipping timing. But it's pretty good. How much time has passed since the bike trip?
Bike trip, what are we on now? It's about 3.5 years, which is mental. Is it 3.5? 2023 now, isn't it? Yeah. I finished December 19.
And how do you feel like, because the bike trip was presumably driven by like a sense of adventure, would you even say restlessness? What would you say drove it?
I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently, and I think it was I had achieved what I wanted to achieve from the army. So for years, and I mean from like age 14, 15, all I'd wanted to do was to do the things I did in the military. and then to have achieved them, and you get to like 26, 27, and you're like, I've done what I wanted to do. It's kind of like, what next? And the bike trip thing had been in my mind and my head for years, from like first ever time I went to Afghan, read about the concept of bike touring, and that was where I was like, this seems to be like almost a bigger thing than what I'd done with the army. So I think that was it was achieving my goals and then kind of being like, what's next? So I think that's what drove the bike trip.
But what about the desire? Like, I guess, so you learnt about it in a book, right? So that's what planted the seed.
Yeah, I was in Afghan, and whilst I was there, it was not the funnest of fun times. And I was reading this book by a guy that had biked around the world for like 4 years, called Alistair Humphreys. And in his book, I'm seeing this guy from the same area I'm from, and he's having this massive adventure. And he's in like Siberia in the winter, and he's in all Africa and South America, and all by bicycle. And I didn't know that was even possible. And I was like, surrounded by concrete and fences. And I was like, I think I need to do this.
Get me some of this, yeah.
yeah.
But the return, because obviously we talked in the first podcast about the trip itself, and and it's all available on YouTube to follow. Like, it's not just an epic trip. There's some like big life decisions made en route and captured on video. So it's worth checking out. But and we talked about it a lot in the first podcast. But I guess, you know, what I'm trying to achieve with the podcast now is to unpick like how people manage their own well-being, I guess, but also performance. Like, those two words, in some ways I feel like they mean the same thing. I've spoken to some people about what they see the term performance to mean, and a lot of people see it as quite business focused and quite KPI driven and all that kind of stuff, which isn't what it really meant to me. I like, for me, performance on an individual basis is like, starts with how you feel when you get up in the morning, you know, and that's the idea of the podcast. It's to explore how people get the best out of themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually, with all of the sort of various categories that come underneath that. So that epic trip that was driven by a sense of adventure, and the seed was planted by the book when you were in Afghanistan. It's so epic though that it finishing and then what happens next kind of maybe presents a challenge, I guess.
I think that's the bit that very often people forget about. So like, if anyone's got a huge goal, no matter what it is, if there's an Olympian that's trying to win the gold medal, or if you've got a big work goal, or you do a huge expedition or trip in, like, for me it was 18 months on a big thing, and then it ended. That what you do afterwards, like, is very often just forgotten about. Like, you don't think about that, and I think going to what you just said about performance, like, it can be really easy to say I achieved what I wanted to achieve and therefore I've performed well, or I'm a high performer. But it's everything, isn't it? And I think all of those things are linked. So yeah, it definitely did come with challenges coming back, and more than happy to delve into those challenges. But it's something, when I speak to other people at the moment that are looking at doing big expeditions, it's probably maybe on my mind is thinking to the finish. Like, and the finish is, finish is life, do you know what I mean? So it's like, don't just almost have the idea of just a trip, come home and life will be normal, because you're probably going to have a different perspective based on whatever's happened.
So understanding why you want to go on such a trip, I guess visualizing, you're going to change how you view the world during that time, especially when it's 18 months. That's a long time. So it's difficult to prepare for the transition back to normality, I guess. But what do you feel that you've learned in the process of going back to a more normal life?
I think it's been okay with not having all the answers, because very often, like, on one hand, I'm like thinking about coming back, but you won't know it as well. So it's a really hard one to work out. So like, not having all the answers and believing that in yourself is a really big part of this. So like whilst I'm on my bicycle in the middle of remote Alaska or Canada, my bike would break and I'd trust in myself that I'd either work out a way to fix it, or someone or something would help me in some way to get this back working. And I ended up getting back on the road. It all worked out eventually. Might have taken a day or two, and you start to think, be a bit more chilled out, a bit more calm with things going wrong. And that's definitely translated into life, being like, if the job you wanted to go for doesn't work out, or something, in the end it'll work out the way it's meant to, I think. That's my perspective. That's definitely been changed from the bike trip.
Yeah. And did you, I mean, you mentioned that it was kind of challenging, the transition. What did those challenges kind of look like?
Yeah, so I didn't really know where to live. I think that's like a really clear, basic, easy one to start with. I lived abroad with the military for years, in military communities. So Cyprus and Germany, and it's real difficult to, you can't just live in Cyprus with the military. You could live with the military community, but I wouldn't be part of it anymore, so it'd be a bit weird. I wouldn't really to be able to get a job there. As much as I enjoyed being there I was there for 3 years. So I was coming back to the UK. It was always part of my plan, I felt, and connecting to family and friends and deciding where to live. And very often people just live where they either work or where their family live. And I didn't just want to live where my family lived. I weren't really there weren't a lot for me there, I felt, and I hadn't lived there since I was 18, so it was a long time ago. So that was the first big one. And then I came back at a weird time. Everybody went through COVID, so I came back 3 months before COVID started. So things just being weird in the world, which we all had our own unique experiences there, and I probably had it luckier than many because I was working for the government, which meant I was able to still work, which I was fortunate for. But it was the where to live, finding out what do I do next. I'd had these big goals, be in the military, be an army officer, operations. Somebody screaming behind us.
Yeah.
Getting in the sea.
Yeah, no, I can confirm that she's okay. She's currently ankles deep in the sea, so she should be okay.
And
yeah, you had the big goals to achieve,
but then not having any.
Yeah.
So that's another big challenge. Is like, where do I go? Do I need a big goal next? Living without a big goal for the first time is quite different, especially when you've only ever had them.
Yes, yeah, and I guess the military attracts like goal-orientated people to an extent, or adventure-orientated people. But and to that point, I guess adventure is definitely something that's driven you. If you were to look at your career, as with a lot of people who've been in the military, once that large adventure was over, how did you? Because like you say, it wasn't easy, but did you think about? Is adventure still something that drives you, and if so, where do you find it now? I mean, now obviously we're in Bournemouth. You live just beyond those cliffs there. You have what is on paper a relatively normal job. Where does the adventurous Adam fit in with that now?
It's almost reframing what adventure means.
Yeah.
And for me, it was always big, old epic things. So leaving your job and travelling on a bicycle for 18 months is quite an epic in anyone's eyes, really. It's the length of time, really, rather than just going for a bike ride for a day is not a hugely epic thing. But it can be as well. I had a bike ride just on those hills behind us about two months ago where I broke my front wheel and had a massive crash and had to put my bike on my shoulder and ended up having to run up a hill to get to a pub. And that was a big old adventure for a day. So I think it's reframing what is adventure. And adventure can be daily. It can be going into the sea every day. I know you went in for a little dip this morning. But doing that in the winter, going on bike rides, setting new challenges, be it small or big, and I think it's having that balance, not having to like upend your whole life to go and do something big and adventurous. It's being in a relationship and starting a family and things like that, that's a huge adventure. Like, I know, yeah, no.
A fairly grim one.
You had
Yeah.
some restless nights recently, but it's one of those where you see millions of people doing it, but it's a big thing. And rather than having what I did on the bike, I often felt it was quite selfish because it was so solitary for large periods, and I was like, what value am I actually bringing to society? That did sit with that maybe drove a little bit of the I'll create YouTube videos and try and share this, but there's definitely a lot of self-interest in why I was doing that. I wanted to, like, I don't know, make some money from it and towards the end, and I don't know exact reasons for it, to create, to tell stories, to inspire, made me feel good. But I'm like, I'm not providing to society. So I suppose coming back now is like try to help out with community groups.
Reframing adventure has been something that's essentially helped with the transition, because the transition at first wasn't easy, was it? I mean, you mentioned before about like feeling a lack of purpose.
I think that's, yeah, and I think that's probably come as a result of having my whole life been quite goal orientated, quite driven with whatever I was like focused on at that time, and then suddenly coming back and being pretty lost, if I'm honest, like not knowing where to go next, where to live, what is important to me. And one of the things I did feel from the bike trip was important was building community. Very often with anything we do, there's a cost to it, whatever you choose. So if you choose not to go on a big adventure and you want to do one, the cost is you'll always want to go on a big adventure, but you might have more money and you might have a more stable family life. And I think if you go on a big old adventure, you're probably going to have less money and you have a less stable family, you know. So for me, the cost was really coming back, whilst I was away, the cost was community. I didn't really have an established community in the UK. Didn't really know where I belonged as such, and the military promotes that heavily, sense of belonging. And I'm sure they had an advert run a few years ago, and it's true. The military does definitely make you feel part of a big old club. Like me and you went through military training together. We didn't know each other at that point, but we've got a sense of belonging from being part of an organisation together, which has resulted in us being here today.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've both felt that, and lots of other organisations, particularly like big public sector emergency services types.
Yeah.
People that are in sports teams, they'll all feel like this belonging, which is so hard to replicate in the real world. And it's like, try and find that in the real world, but it's my current life.
Yeah, well, I think the real world is an accurate description, because one of the things that I kind of find interesting is the particular point around purpose. And so, because in your case, there's the difference from an adventure that is going on every day for 18 months, which then comes to an end, and that whatever routine you've got yourself into, which revolves around being outdoors, riding your bike, going from place to place, being in very rural places, problem solving, creating videos and so on. So whilst, you know, maybe you would eventually get tired of that, there is this sense of freedom that comes with that, I would imagine. And then to transition from that to the real world, which I do think is an accurate description, and then this kind of like, well, so what am I doing now, which is this a question around purpose. And I think part of the reason for speaking to you and others is that I think a lot of people have been on that journey. So the other first video episode that I did was with someone who had a very traumatic experience in the military, and it didn't break them or anything like that, but it led them to do a huge amount of reflecting about why they are here. And I don't think that's uncommon. I think that a lot of people are maybe doing jobs they don't enjoy, that don't fulfill them, that don't feel aligned with a particular purpose. And it can come and go in life, maybe. But do you feel like you've you've essentially, I mean, it's 3 years. It's quite a long time, even though it's passed quickly. Do you feel that you've regained what was that sort of feeling of loss from that trip?
I think where I'm at now is I've become okay to a point with not knowing my direction. Whereas before, I was always trying to control where I'm going next. So very often we group things. So when we talk about purpose, we group things just for ease, don't we? We talk about professional, your personal life. Yeah, that's probably the two big areas we talk about. And in both of those things, I don't know where I'm going exactly with both of those things. I've got a good idea, particularly professionally. I'm focusing on probably the next 3 to 6 months, and I'll see where I'm at then. And I'm really okay with that. And it makes some decisions really difficult. Like, I'm looking to buy a house at the moment. That's really hard when you're like, where am I going to be in 2 years' time? And I think, like, location-wise and community-wise, you have to kind of just stay somewhere to know what to build that. And if you don't stay in one place and start doing what I basically did throughout my 20s and just move around a lot, it can be quite hard. Hello, I've got a dog here. Hello, Magnus. So yeah, it's sorry.
No. Oh, come on, lie down. Time to lie down. No climbing cuddles.
We've got Magnus the pooch jumping on us there, giving us some love on the beach.
You can lie down.
But yeah, I think that's it. Not knowing where I'm going is okay. Whereas before, that would have made me feel a bit uneasy.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily I found the answer. This is it. It's just being okay with not having the answer.
Yeah. And those, like, the answer can be like big goals that take a long time to achieve. But I guess if we think, like, contrary to that, if you were to sort of break down how you have approached, like, day to day, what are some of the boxes that you like to tick in terms of your, like, well-being, I guess?
Yeah, and I think the
performance?
biggest ones for me is obviously health. For the first time really in my life, I've made big changes thinking about actually like my physical and mental health. Something that, I don't know, probably took for granted just throughout my 20s and was in denial about anything that wasn't great. So I'd be physically fit enough to do whatever I needed to do, but very often would be drinking too much alcohol, not sleeping enough, exercising inconsistently, but being fit enough and robust enough to get on with stuff. But now it's a routine for me. I'm still not the best with sleep. I could definitely be better. I try to work out most days, and whatever that means can be different. So it doesn't mean I need to go and do a gym session for 2 hours a day. It could be today I'm going to go for a bike ride with a group of friends, or actually tonight I'm going to go. I'm meeting up with a swim club on the end of where we're sat now, and I'm going to go swim for an hour in the sea and proper swimming as well, which is something quite new, and listen to some live music afterwards. And that's the other second part of it is like relationships and leisure side, like being able to spend time with people, and particularly important. I think today, when over the last 3 years we're working a lot more remote than we ever have. I work remotely for a US-based company, and the thing I struggle with the most, and I'm really open about this when I talk to people at work as well, is the not seeing people in person. I love the aspects of the remote side, but I really do miss and enjoy being with people. And I think I can't get it from work, so what I do is make sure I organise things around my life to spend time with people.
Yeah.
And even us doing this in person now rather than over Zoom makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we're going to look back on in 10, 15 years, and we're going to see us all becoming so much more screen-based, and we're going to lose a lot of the good bits that come. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this podcast originally was born kind of coincidentally, but it was during the pandemic. I'd wanted to do it for a long time. Only one of the first 46 episodes was in person, which was episode number 1.
Right.
And there was no video, obviously. This is now the second video episode, if you like. But part of the vision, if you like, for bringing it back is that it should, wherever possible, be in person and be experiential as well, because I think that's certainly for me as well. It's like that's where the value really in life comes from. It's from having experiences with other people or alone, to be fair, but that's kind of the goal. That's what the van, the equipment, even the dog is relatively new. He's only 3 years old. For me, that's what it's all about, and I'm trying to build pretty much a lifestyle around it.
And it taps into like being in the military, very in person, and then if I go on a world bike trip, it's the most colourful experience I've ever had. And then to suddenly go and sit in one room behind a screen, I think it'd kill me, honestly. So, even though I do sit in one room, but I do try and get out and meet people where I can with work, and that's always a pleasure. I do have some colleagues in the UK that we do things wherever that may be, and but that's like just a little bit of the side. But clearly we have our own personal relationships. We've got friends, family. It's like trying to just get out as much as you can. Say yes to those opportunities, whatever that may be. You might be able to hear some noise. We've got a big volleyball team playing right next to us. It's quite nice.
Yeah, you mentioned like the balancing of work, like which for so many people is very computer based. Like I'm the same. I spend a majority of the working day behind a computer screen, but it's about introducing things like you mentioned your habits, making things habitual, which is certainly a reoccurring theme when you speak to different people about how they get the best out of themselves. It tends to be habitual behaviour that doesn't relate to how you're feeling, i.e. you have to do it regardless of whether you feel good or bad, but it's generally something positive that makes you feel good afterwards. So, I mean, I don't know everything that you do, but one example being the cold water dipping, which we've both done today. We were due to do it together, but we've done it independently, which is fine. And then we come together and reflect on our experiences. But how did that come about, and what does it do for you? And I know you've kind of set yourself an objective that relates to it as well, although it's not.
Yeah, so for me, it's being in the sea or any other cold water, a river or whatever, I find invigorating. It gives you energy, wakes you up. It's just a beautiful experience. And doing it with people adds another dimension to it.
Right.
So I, for years, even on the bike trip, at any opportunity would dip in a river. Like, so cycling through France, at any chance I could. And usually it'd be quite functional to get clean, or just to feel fresh. You'd be so hot and sweaty, or be in a waterfall somewhere in Thailand, I'd get into it, or wherever I was in the world, just get in the river.
Yeah.
And I would rarely say no to, if I saw it and be like, oh, I'd love to get in there, I'd just get in and deal with being wet and soaking and uncomfortable later.
Yeah.
But it always felt great. And so that's something that I've done for years. I even probably did it when I was in the military, but back then it'd be crawling through rivers to get onto an attack position or something.
Yeah.
But here it's like, we're doing it on the beach, so you're in a beautiful place, and I get out early each morning, so before work. We meet at like 7:30 most days. And I'm not going to over-egg the health benefits, because I don't know enough about the science with it, and a lot of it can be debated, but I know it makes me feel better, and that's enough, you know? Like, if you do something every day with people that makes you feel good, that's good enough for me.
What's the objective that you've set yourself? Like how many? Because I guess you don't want to do it every single day. I guess you don't until you've really got used to it or into it. Then you don't necessarily want to do it every single day. How do you? Because you don't do it every day.
I do pretty much want to do it most days.
You do.
Yeah, like that's the weird bit there. Yeah.
But has that been the case from the
There's been
My,
sometimes...
my point is that it's not a hugely, for someone who's starting from scratch,
Yeah.
it's not a hugely pleasant experience, is it? There's a degree of discomfort, which is where the benefits maybe
And I
kind of
think
come
that's
from.
part of it, you know. I think it's a bit of an analogy to life. Like, we are, as a society and as humans, so comfortable all the time. Think back to 100 years ago, it'd have been the 20s. Life was a hell of a lot more uncomfortable for people back then. And go another 100 years back then, 1820, it was much grimmer. Most people were living in poverty and were farming. Now, we have more money, more health, benefits and care. I know things aren't great in lots of ways, but it's never been really as good as it is now on the whole. We have sofas that are really comfy, you know, like just that alone. And being in the sea every day or being in cold water is just like a really controlled way of introducing some discomfort. And to the point now where that level of discomfort isn't discomfort, that's just a normal baseline, this is fine.
Yeah.
And I think that analogy then adds to other part of your life. When something is uncomfortable, it feels less uncomfortable. And I think we could do with being physically at least a little bit more uncomfortable at times than we currently are.
I agree. In terms of getting out the starting blocks though, because most people are not going to get into the habit of cold water dipping. Some will, but most won't. And there are certain things that you've got in your favour, like you live on a very large sandy beach, a walking distance away from it and so on, but which makes a big difference. There are other ways to do it, you know, like open water and so on. But what was the goal that you set yourself? Was it every other day?
Yeah, so I was originally, even this year still, it's like try to dip 200 times in the year. And I'm on target at that at the moment, but I'm not really that, I haven't checked for maybe a month or so where I'm at with that. I know I'm over 100 for the year and we're halfway through. So and it's summer and it doesn't feel too challenging today. It's more of a social thing.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's a pleasure, isn't it? It's like there's no in the winter, obviously we did it in February, and that requires you either need to be accustomed and it's part of your routine and you're used to it and conditioned for it, or you need something that's going to get you that way.
I think the
like
social
discipline.
side helps.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
doing it with people, like if there isn't a group that you can't find, so say if you live in the UK, you're probably never more than, I think it's like 70 miles from the sea. You can fact check me on that, I might be wrong, but we are an island nation, so we live near the sea, even though you may not. So you are within, a couple of hours away from the sea, even if you live in the Midlands. But there's rivers everywhere and lakes everywhere, and a lot of these, to be the negative person, are polluted and aren't great. So there's lots of reasons not to, but you can equally,
I guess, as well.
Yeah, and you can equally get a cold shower, which is probably harder actually. I find that much harder than getting in the sea. But I suppose with this, the social aspect, I think is where I'd start. And that depends on you probably pushing yourself out there and being a bit sociable. But if you go on Facebook or any other meetup type apps, you can find groups all over the country, up and down the country, that are equally crazy people as me that want to just get in the water at least once a week. And I've made friends with someone recently who started a dipping group locally. She started it on Sundays. She's got a disability and she struggles to go on long walks with her friends. So she's like, how can I socialise with my friends still? So she started a dip group every week, 10 a.m. And it's become more than her meeting her friends. It's become a real community. It's called Cold Water Collective. And she takes really beautiful photographs, and that's like part of the attraction to the group is you get a photograph of you in the sea, which is a really rare place to get photos because she's got a really great camera housing.
Yeah.
So she created something out of nothing only about 2-3 years ago, and we're actually working on a short film at the moment where we're going to really talk about that group. So that's another thing I've tried to get involved with locally, is the creative side of things, of making something creative, putting a spotlight on other people in the community to try and tell stories and show that other people, if they want to go cold water dipping, it's as simple as going on Facebook, create an event, and
finding one,
or finding one, and maybe 2 people will turn up, and then it may be 3, and it'll grow.
What's interesting is a couple of points. Firstly, I think I've seen that picture that she took of you, and you look like David Hasselhoff. You know what I mean? Like she's nailed it. So she definitely has. She definitely has got a powerful camera. No, but yeah, the other thing is just around the physical aspects, because I think to make, again, it's one of the reasons that I do this. It's because I think most people, or lots of people, have different methods of achieving the same thing, which is, you could describe it as feeling tranquil, content, motivated, healthy, whatever it may be, some kind of positive feeling or drive or emotion, but they achieve it through different means, and that's why the idea is to meet up with the person, experience what they do and how they get those benefits, but unpick the similarities between them. So when you were describing it just now, it made me think, in my case, that the thing that I've got into is cycling. You know, like I have an objective for the year, like you, which is sort of slightly more further than last year, and you can track your progress against it, and ultimately what you end up doing is getting a really long way ahead of it, and then you feel quite relaxed. Some people have negative feelings about having that specific objective, because it's pressure, but if you can avoid that, then that's great. So you're kind of measuring your output and challenging yourself. But then also it's the social aspects as well, you know, having that shared experience, ideally of something that is physical in nature, for me is where real benefits come. Like, you don't get the same benefits from playing computer games, even if it is in a community environment where you can speak to lots of people and stuff like that, because we haven't really evolved to live that way. And so that's why I enjoy hearing about how different people do it. In the case of, you know, whether it's people who just go walking, had a mountaineering individual on. How do you achieve those sort of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual benefits? Essentially, that's what we're looking to kind of explore. And what I love about the Cold Water Collective that you described, that group, and the community, is the combination of the two. It's kind of ticking the physical, well, or potentially all four of those categories, really.
Something you just mentioned about video games, and I'd put into that, like, almost anything, like, be it your phone, loads of social media apps, or YouTube, or films even. As much as I love films, I play games, I do all these things, but what they do is distract you.
Right.
And that's what I find for myself. My experience is I don't have to think about how I feel. I don't have to think about how... Sometimes I'll do it... I used to play, back in the day, I used to play Call of Duty or FIFA after a rubbish day at work, just to, like, kind of escape from having to think about that rubbish day at work. And I'm almost like, anything we do, and most of us, it's mindless scrolling through social, it's to escape feeling whatever you're feeling. And that might be boredom. Being bored is a feeling that we don't like feeling anymore. And I'm not great at this, so I'm not saying I never go on any of these things. I'm terrible quite often with phone time and playing games and watching films, albeit I think that's... and even books, you know, books are great. None of these are bad as such, but they are an escape. I love books to escape to another world. And I think there can be there's a balance, again, needed with that, like, for sure. There's being able to address how you feel and get outside and spend time with people, as opposed to, tonight I'm going to just sit by myself and ignore this. That's what I'm probably saying this as a reminder to myself. Whenever I play video games for, like, a few hours, I'll feel worse. And I won't be like, oh, that was great. I feel better. It'll always feel a bit worse.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's just me. Maybe I don't know.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's just you. I'm sure some people get a lot out of it, but I don't think many. I don't
want to hate on games as well, because I get why people do it, and I think there can be, like, games.
Some of them are amazing. I guess you can only talk about your own experience, can't you? Like, I'm sure it's great for some people and some people love it. In my experience, the same as you, if I was to play a computer game, which I have done in the past, like the distant past, for extended periods of time, I don't really feel any benefit from it at all. If anything, probably feel slightly worse. Which
it's funny how we we look at books like they're good, and that's a similar thing. I think I'm not hating on books. I love books. A lot of me loves games as well, but it is to escape very often, particularly a novel. If you're going into to read a story, but there's something, it makes you feel great very often when you get really deep into one of these. It's then what can that bring to your actual life? Because if you just live in this imaginary world constantly, and then I suppose it's balance.
Being
all
present.
Of these things.
Yeah. I think the thing with books, I always see them as like slightly different, almost like in a different category to games, because just games are so stimulating and they're not. Imagine if you reflected on everything you've learned from books in your life versus everything you've learned from computer games.
I'm playing Zelda at the moment. I'm really enjoying it.
Are you learning?
Do you know? And my brother's a really big gamer, and for him, that is his community.
Right.
For him, his friends, and he goes to like. What do they call it? World of Warcraft type events and Warhammer events, so up and down the country. It's not my bag, but seeing him so like happy in that world with different people for different things, like for him going for a dip in the sea, he'd be like, that's mental. Why would I want to do that? Like that. And he's a fit dude that he's a gym instructor, so like you wouldn't expect somebody in that world to do that, but he really does enjoy that. So I don't know, these different things can bring different.
So I'll do a podcast in someone's bedroom with
do it over VR, mate. So virtual you meets with somebody else.
My avatar. And we'll talk about the spiritual benefits. I mean, I would do that. At the end of the day, it's about what works for individuals. That's because their themes are always similar. And it's good to try and essentially connect the dots, if you like.
And going like to the way the world is going, how we are spending so much more of our time in the virtual space, be it just on cameras talking to each other, or as we will most likely move into the future, into having 3D represented versions of ourselves in games, and we're interacting in a world. I do worry that particularly younger generations won't see the benefit of enjoying the world for what it is, and won't travel in the same way. And like, I'm about to give a talk about my bike trip for the first time this week. I've never given one before, and at the end I have some key lessons, 5 lessons I've learned, and one of them is to not read the news, is to get out there and try and enjoy and see the world that it is, because I think the news often gives us a negative perception of the world. All of us, it's entertainment, ultimately. It's there to get as many viewers as it can. And we see that with, like, I don't know, gossipy sex scandals that we see with celebrities. That it's not really news. This is just entertainment at this point. And very often our negative perception of the world is based off what we're seeing there. And that being on a bike trip, every country I went to, if I'm in Thailand, they'll be like, oh, don't go to Laos, it's really dangerous, you might get shot. And I'd go to Laos and they'd say the same thing about China. And then you go to another, everyone's scared of their neighbours. And I'm like, actually, when you go there, it's all right. Like, the US are really scared of Mexico. And actually, if you go to Mexico, I'm not saying there's no crime, but you'll probably be all right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. So what are the other 4 lessons?
Ooh, memory. That's one. Let me think.
One is don't read the news, because it makes you scared of your neighbours, and lots of other stuff, doesn't it? Ultimately, just it kind of generates
I've got it on a list.
Fear.
Let me get this up.
Putting you on the spot.
The first one is to say yes to offers of kindness.
Yes. Was that an offer of kindness?
That was an offer of kindness.
I said yes.
I found it really hard. This might be a British thing. I found it really hard when somebody would accept offer you something to say yes, we all go, no thanks. Even though you might want, I don't know, someone's offered you a bit of food, you'd be like, oh no, I'm okay, thanks. And I got to the point where I realised people are offering because it makes them happy.
Yeah.
And very often people would love you to say yes. So
they're trying to connect with you.
Yeah, so I started saying yes to offers of kindness.
I think that not only does it make them happy, but they're trying to make you happy.
And I think the second part of that is then to offer kindness to people as well, to like pay it back and not just sponge and take, but like, so this week, so when I went travelling around on my bike, I was on a website called Warm Showers.
Yeah.
And Warm Showers is a community where people host cycle tourists in their homes. And you offer them a warm shower at least, but very often I'd have a bed, sometimes it's just a patch of grass in the garden to camp in, and very often they'd cook food, and I always saw it as, I'm gonna pay them in stories. Hello. I'm gonna pay them in stories, and you've got to really be there to entertain almost. But this week I'm hosting a French lady who's just cycled through the UK. So she's staying with me on Wednesday and Thursday. I normally go for a bike ride on Wednesday, so I've said if you'd like, you can join us on this big group ride with about 20, 30 of us.
Yeah.
She's really said, oh, I'm really looking forward to that. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. And for me, that's like travelling without travelling. So if anyone here wants to offer kindness,
no, come on.
it's very similar to couch surfing,
but
for bike tourers. So look at Warm Showers. I stayed with so many interesting characters through Warm Showers. People, a lot of retired people that were just lonely and were like, I can't travel because I don't have the health to do it, but instead travellers come to me, and they have all these. I've made really beautiful friends from it. So
that makes sense. So, so say yes to offers of kindness and also return them. It's lesson number 2.
Thrive with less. I think this is something I very much realised living out of 4 bags. It's really 2 panniers and a rucksack and a handlebar bag. And I did that for a year and a half, and I wasn't wanting for anything, like possession-wise. I do now own a sofa and a bed and like normal.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Normal things. But it is a reminder to myself, because we can all get brought down a consumerist view, is most of the things you buy you don't need, and you're paying money which you work for to spend on stuff to impress people that you don't care about very often. So thriving with less is just a bit of a reminder, really, for me, but if anyone else needs that, don't go on Amazon and buy that random gadget if you don't need it. Like, I often put things in my basket and wait a month for, like, particularly purchases. Purchases are expensive. Anything over £1,000 I don't buy for a while. I usually be like laptops and cameras and stuff like that. Bikes can be bad. People get bike habits. You don't need a bike habit. I've got 2 at the moment. That's it. One's a really expensive one, one's really cheap, and I ride the cheap one most of the time because I'm worried about it getting stolen. Yeah,
I think it's about informed purchases rather than compulsive. I try to do the same thing. I do have three bikes, but I think I've worked out, it's over a period of years, I've worked out what bikes I want / need. So I'm never going to have 6, 7, 8. I think the optimal number of bikes for me and the different types of cycling that I do is either 2, 3 or 4. But then I ride my bike 8 hours a week, so that's my thing.
Big thing,
So buyer's remorse though is a real thing, and it's like, whilst I've spent a lot of time thinking about bikes, I totally agree, and it's another theme that you get from people. They're putting stuff on finance and buying, whatever it may be, whether it's TVs, trainers, cars. Cars is a big one, I think. Like what
do you really need to what?
Cars is, I think, almost the perfect example. Because with a bike, you get some kind of physical benefit from it. You're outdoors, you're moving through space, like you're having an experience. Whereas in a car, I don't know, the difference between a £40,000 car on finance, which is nearly the cost of a mortgage each month, versus one that is a quarter of the price, you're not going to have much of a different experience. So yeah, I totally agree. Considered like purchases, like working out what you want to buy, why you need it, and then not acquiring excessive stuff, definitely rings true with me.
If you can afford it, crack on. But what we are, a lot of people are doing is getting things on finance, which then, what I found pre-bike trip is debt. I've not got this here, but debt as a
Way of
thing
living,
weighs you down,
Yeah.
and it stops you doing stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't give you the freedom to have this really nice car. What it does, it ties you into now having to keep that certain job,
Yeah.
which means you can't leave your job and do an 18-month world bike trip,
Yeah.
because you need to keep paying your finance payments. Now, mortgages, cars just seem to be part of life, but as soon as I didn't have those things at that point in my life, I was free.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if someone here is listening to this thinking, I want to be free, I was in debt at one point to the tune of about 20 grand, mate. I was in really and it was consumerist nonsense purchases, but I was getting paid a regular wage, mostly on overdrafts and credit cards, just living frivolously and going on holidays, expensive holidays, and cutting all that stuff out. It took me about 2.5 years of cutting everything out, sold my car, bought something cheaper.
Yeah.
And
you were disciplined to get back to where you wanted to be.
And it was because I felt trapped. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to leave this job because I can't not pay these debt repayments. As soon as I got to zero, it was like feeling like I was free at zero. So not had anything in the world, and that felt free.
Yeah.
So getting to the other way when you're plus 20 grand, and that's pretty much, I cycled with 10 grand in the bank. That felt great. It was like, oh, I've got this freedom to. But very often people are like, what would you do if you won the lottery? And my answer was I'd travel around the world on a bicycle. But the actual number I needed for that was 10 grand, not the lottery.
That's such a powerful example.
Yeah.
And I've kind of done some similar reflecting. Because the question is like, it's a great question. What would you do if you win the lottery? Because it's something that lots of people consider.
If money wasn't an issue.
Yeah, and it's like I would buy this car, I'd buy this car, I'd buy that house, and so on and so forth. It's like, okay, that's not what you would do. That's what you would buy.
You might do that for a bit, and then
so those transactions are now complete. What are you going to do now? And for me, the answer is, stuff like this.
Yeah.
To be honest, and it's riding my bike, going out with the dog, going out in the van. But it took me a while to sort of come to those conclusions, and then also develop I've obviously grown a business in that time as well, which means that I can't just do all those things whenever, but if you work out what you're actually driven by, then that's what you would do if you win the lottery.
Have you ever heard the story of I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but there's a fisherman, let's say he's in Mexico, living a really chilled life in his little village, and this American tourist goes on holiday there and sees this fisherman, and he's like, oh, do you know what you could do? Like, you could get a couple more boats here, and this guy's just like living a really peaceful life, and he's like, yeah, and then what? And once you've got a couple more boats, you could really ramp up production and bring in a lot more fish, and you'd have a lot more money. And he's like, and then what you do? Oh, you could buy a really fancy house, and you could live like a bit further away from the beach. And it's like, and then what? And it's like, and then you'd be able to do whatever you want. And it's like, I'm already doing what I want.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, very often, like people, their version of winning the lottery could be quite simple. I'm not saying having no money worries. Very often, if you had lots and lots of money, it would probably become another problem in itself. So that was Thrive with Less.
Yeah.
Is that point. Make a plan. This is the next one. Make a plan, but be open to change. And I think that's a bit of what we talked about at the beginning. Like, having big plans is okay. Like, this year, I want to swim 200 times a year, but I might change that plan. I might be like, actually, 150 was the right number for me. Or it could be, I'm going to cycle from Alaska to Argentina, and actually I called it a day in New Orleans and came home for Christmas rather than being rigid to the plan.
Yeah.
And having a plan's great, but being able to change is also powerful. My final point that I'll be talking about is community equals belonging equals happiness. It's less of a do this point, it's more of something I've come to understand myself is those three things. Having community makes me feel a sense of belonging, and that ultimately brings me the most happiness in my life. So, albeit professionally, I want things to go okay. If things didn't, but I still had a really good, strong community, and I've seen this all over the world. Like people with the least money in countries that had, like Laos and Thailand in particular, I'm thinking very remote communities, that because they have community, they're so happy. And happy on a different, like what makes them happy is having food on the table, having a safety,
Yeah.
being able to have health, have good health.
Spending time with one another.
Yeah, and being able to give, and these people give, mate. Like, unlike, my dad's a builder, and whenever he's doing jobs, wherever it may be, if he's on a council estate, he'd always get offers cups of teas from people. And he always said, whenever I was on the nice estates, you never get offered a cup of tea. And that link almost goes, in the West, we often don't give as much. Whereas when I was in Thailand, someone will be there, like, offering you a bit of food, and I feel so guilty, like, me on this fancy bike and a Western tourist travelling through, but then saying yes to offers of kindness. They're, like, so happy to have you there to talk through stories, and I'd be so happy that they give me kindness and I try to give it back. So it's, just focus on the things that ultimately make us happy, which is community and belonging.
But would you say it took you some time to, say, extract those 5 lessons? You didn't extract them on the bike trip, did you?
No,
you've done that quite recently, within the last...
Yeah, I wrote them a few months ago, those points.
So that's really recently.
Yeah, and some of them have like, thriving with less is something I knew was happening.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, some of them are like, they've not reading the news only really started to come about having skipped through a lot of borders and seen the new... I was an intelligence officer in the military, and part of that role was understanding the geopolitical situation, in particular in Syria and Iraq. And it's so weird leaving the military, like understanding where all the different groups were in Syria in particular. Like, I 2018, I really knew what was going on in Iraq, in Syria, and then stopping looking at the reports, stop looking at the news reports of what was happening with Russia and the US and Assad's groups, and suddenly just ejecting myself from that and not reading any news, and I just felt better. Like, particularly when you're following a conflict at the time. But it's the same with the UK. If you're, I'm still not great at this, but if you're looking at a news source, it is entertainment in to get you in.
Yeah.
And
the more sort of shocking the news, then the more it grabs your attention. I've actually been, it's funny, in the last week or so, I've got a news app on my phone, and that's one of the go-tos.
Yeah.
When I, if you've got a few spare moments, and it's quite sort of in-depth stuff, but I've been thinking about deleting it.
And I suppose it's where you get your news is key. I mean, a lot of people are getting red top newspapers. You're listening to Happily Slate, The Sun and the Daily Mail. I've got no time for them, mate. It's just, like, their websites are like garbage. It's just celebrity.
Yeah, they're designed to get your attention for as long as possible. But even like the Times or the Telegraph or whatever, they do it in a different way. So there's this narrative at the moment in the UK that is essentially doom and gloom about the economy, which just becomes self-perpetuating. Like, it just means that people's confidence is affected, and it may well be true, but that there's that narrative that's just repeated over again and again and again, and then it affects how you feel day to day. Like, as someone running a small business, you kind of like you feel more vulnerable to it, I guess, than I did when I had a job, although that was a while ago now. But it affects your outlook. If you read something about inflation and the cost of borrowing and all this kind of stuff, and it's heaped on again and again and again. Even if it is true, what are you actually going to do about it?
It's so hard, isn't it? That fine balance. 'Cause I don't want to be equally oblivious to a world of traumatic event, seeing like fires happening in roads at the moment. That is news, knowing about that. But then it's how that could be shown. It's obviously today it's shown through weirdly, I see the news and it'll be shown through a British holidaymaker lens rather than this local community that's been devastated lens. And I get that. We're British people reading British news, you're going to get that British perspective. And we don't all want doom and gloom and war. There's a lot of good stuff out there that's happening, but it just doesn't make the news. It's not as interesting, like nothing happened in Bournemouth this weekend.
No,
it's boring.
No, they should have put this something big is happening in Bournemouth today. The volleyball tournament and a podcast being recorded.
I suppose here recently there's been a lot of traumatic events happen in Bournemouth. 2 children died just down the road from where we are.
Yeah, that was a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, and with things happening like that, it is horrendous, and it brings the whole town down. And it's horrendous for the families. It's horrendous for everybody. And I don't know. It's everyone involved in that, including the people that responded. And I suppose it's like trying to have some balance with some good news that might happen as well. And I don't think we should gloss over the bad stuff.
No, but equally. I think limiting your exposure, maybe. Yeah. Again, it's like back to early points about habitual things, doing things with some not super rigid schedule, but making something habitual. So, for example, you read the paper at the weekend. Yeah. And that's your thing, like you
I get an email newsletter from a thing, it's called The Knowledge. So I'll read it condensed, maybe, I don't know if it's every day, but it comes through and it's a lot of opinion pieces, and sometimes I don't agree with what it's saying, but I try to get from different it's a difficult one, isn't it? But you're right, doing it on a weekend rather than every single day is probably a better way to go.
Yeah. We talked before about the benefits of talking to someone, like exploring how you feel about something from like a personal perspective, and the benefits of that, and even like talking therapy, for example. Like how has that helped in terms of you identifying, say, those 5 lessons, for example, or indeed like how you've built your daily habits to benefit you?
I think, so for therapy, I've only, it's been about 6-7 months since I saw a therapist, but I saw a therapist for 6 months when I moved down here initially. Yeah. And it was really because I just felt so lost with where I was, like location-wise, and I wanted somebody to talk to about it. Yeah. And I think it definitely helped me. I know other people, friends of mine that have gone through therapy and don't seem to have responded as well to it. And I also know people that could probably do with talking to somebody and are in denial about it. For me, it definitely helped. I think there's still a stigma about asking for help, particularly if you're a man. I'd felt it, so I know other people will. And by asking for help doesn't mean asking necessarily your mates. You can pay someone if you can, or there's definitely ways to get it for free through certain organisations that you can, if you've got issues with drugs or alcohol, which you can definitely get. And there's groups out there which do, like Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, and other types of groups that you can have group session therapy. So yeah, for me it definitely has helped me understand why I feel how I know it's normal to feel these things. Yeah. And yeah, not necessarily just think, oh, I'm now fixed and that's that. Like, this is just life, I suppose. And yes. Yeah.
No, that's I think there's it's quite a big thing to admit it and to do it. To do it is one thing, and then also to be open about it as well.
There's two sides to it, I think, because there's a lot. I'm seeing this a lot at the moment with a lot of people that will almost use going through therapy as like a look, I've done all this work on myself, I'm better than you. There's a negative side to this. It's all recently come to light with, there's been a news thing about Jonah Hill, who's released a really good documentary. It's on Netflix called Schultz, and it's about him going to a therapist, it's about his therapist. But recently he's been accused of, Jonah Hill's been accused of abusing a partner. Messages were released from his partner by using therapy talk to say, my boundaries aren't this and this, my boundaries are this and this, to control someone's behaviour. And I think there's a danger of us talking, like going into therapy being cool. And going into therapy means I'm working on myself, I'm better than you. So there's that side, but equally, I don't want to put anyone off going. Or we shouldn't try to, as a society, put people off asking for help, but it's really important. So
I think the benefits definitely outweigh the drawbacks. I know exactly what you mean, though, in terms of, because one of the goals of that process is to make you or anyone more comfortable with who you are, your feelings, your emotions, your wants, your needs, and stuff like that. But then the danger is that you essentially just you end up putting up these barriers potentially just because you feel empowered to do so.
Yeah, my boundary is, I think he had one that you don't spend any time with unhinged friends. And it's such using therapy talk to get somebody to do something which some people would consider as controlling. That's like for him in that example, but I see it personally in life as well with people that maybe going down we talked earlier about the things that are important, being physical health, mental and spiritual, and that whole spiritual side as well, where it's important to understand that side, but it shouldn't be like a hierarchical status game where being more spiritual than another person makes you a better person. And I see that a bit, particularly with certain groups and communities, not just religious types, but people that claim to be spiritual, therefore I'm better than you, is a feeling I get from a lot of people. Whereas for me, it's, I don't know, it's not trying to put hierarchies on these things.
You don't want to have a spiritual showdown.
Or a physical health. A bit of it with the whole cold water dipping is like, I don't want to come across as doing this makes you a better person or makes me better. And I can see that as well with that side. Oh, someone that works out at the gym versus someone that's overweight. Like, I'm better than you because I'm fit. And these things, these ways of judging ourselves, they very often come, I feel, from a place of insecurity.
Yeah.
Like if somebody that is fit feels the need to look down on someone that isn't, it's them that's insecure, and vice versa. If someone that's unfit looks at someone that's a gym dude, and it's like, oh, it's like, no, everyone's got their own things, and no one's better than another person. Probably the better people are the people that just treat people nice.
Yeah.
That's quite simple, that. But. Yeah,
for sure. So you were saying about like you've got some goals for the next sort of like 3 to 6 months, for example. What might they be? Like you're back into creating, aren't you?
Yeah, so there's the film. I'm working on a short film with Annie, the creator of Cold Water Collective. So we're collaborating on that. And for me, that's the first thing I've collaborated without me being filmed. So I created a load of YouTube videos about me biking, which was me filming me. This is me filming a group with her, she's a very creative designer and a graphic designer, and both of us working on something that we hope, the aim for that really is to make something that we could potentially submit to local film festivals and let people have a heartwarming, nice, inspirational 15 minutes. It's like something quite short and small really in that context, and low budget and filmed once a week, so it's not going to take up our whole life on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So that's the creative side of the things I'm working on at the moment. Professionally with work, trying to be successful there. I'm working with sports companies, sports organisations up and down the country, in Europe at the moment. So bringing sports performance technology, predominantly in rugby union.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting, working with a team in the Super League at the moment, and an international team about to go into the Six Nations. So that's the focus work-wise.
Awesome.
And I love that because it's just talking to people that are passionate. Like the other day I was on with a national rugby team and just hearing the passion coming from these people that care about the day-to-day delivery of elite performance to people about to go to the World Cup. It's like I'm not involved, but to be able to provide them with something that can help them. Yeah, I'm like, this is really interesting.
That's awesome.
And then there's personally, me and my partner, really happy, looking at next steps for the future.
Yeah.
Really. So yeah, that's kind of like 3 to 6 months. But
awesome.
yeah.
And then see where you are at that time and go from there.
That's it. And something mad will come up. It always does. I don't know. Something I saw someone say the other day, which I quite liked, was try and do something big every year that you can remember that year for. And it's something I've never really considered before. Like, what is 2023 going to be remembered for? And that could be buying a house or getting married or having kids.
Yeah, or making a film.
Or making a film, or stopping drinking, or
getting a dog. Just some kind of positive change, I guess.
A big thing.
Yeah.
One every year, that it could be going on a big trip to Nepal.
Yeah, that would be a big one.
Epic. Or whatever it may be. So I gave some small and big things there, but some of them are physical, some of them are habit based.
Yeah.
But what that means to you is so individual. But I like that, and that's something I'd like to bring into my life moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time again.
Thank you, mate. And thanks for coming to the beach. I hope you
no, not at all. It's
enjoy
great.
the day. And I know Magnus has enjoyed being by the sea.
Yeah, all these little squeaks are because he wants to go.
He's ready to run around.
Get stuck in, yeah. But he has had a run around. He just doesn't know when to stop. But yeah, he doesn't.
He's bored of our chat. If I'm
pretty
honest.
much, yeah. He doesn't do staying still that well. But not too bad. Border Collie, not even 3 yet, so he's doing okay. But no, it's great to catch up. Thank you for your reflections, and yeah, we'll look forward to the next one.
Thank you.